Thanks for joining us for Political Talk on another PolitiPod Live. Tonight we'll cover the Kennedy Center, the Democratic establishment versus progressive, return to sender, will oil be cooked, international news, and if time permits, an election update. And as always, we'll wrap with our upstream count-up. I'm Hannah Soldner.
I'm John Stafford.
And I'm Matt Nisanoff. We'll start with word on the Kennedy Center. Go right ahead, Hannah. You have something on this.
So yes, I'm calling this Kennedy Center dishonor. So on Monday, the Justice Department, at the behest of the president, filed the latest motion on his ongoing crusade to rename the Kennedy Center after himself. If you'll remember, Trump originally added his name to the building early in his second term, while at the same time shutting it down for what he claimed, well, actually a little bit later, what he claimed were needed repairs. Basically very similar to the refinishing of the reflecting pool or the demolishing of the east wing of the White House, something that he has decided is everybody wants. After a judge ruled that the name could only be changed by Congress, the board of the Kennedy Center, which is run by Trump and his cronies, voted to change it to the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, restored and renovated by Donald J. Trump. This new motion, this happened earlier this week. This new motion states a few things. First, that the renaming is lawful. Second, that there is intent to name the plaza that the building is on the President Donald J. Trump Plaza. It's currently not named, which he's upset about. Third, that the judge's rule that the repair should be stayed should be overruled. And fourth, if the stay is kept, that it should be very limited, only sort of an emergency thing. However, buried in all of this, the motion states that the building is dilapidated and bleeding money, and that only Trump can save it. And that should his renovations not be allowed to continue, the government might be forced to demolish the building for the safety and replace it with an open-air amphitheater, which it also notes, much like with the ballroom, people have been wanting for a long time, even though I've never heard anybody mention this ever. I don't know about the state of the Kennedy Center, but I will say that if it's like the reflecting pool or the East Wing, it didn't really need fixing. It doesn't need repairing. It certainly doesn't need renaming. And actually, while this motion says that it's been bleeding tens of millions of dollars with hundreds of millions of dollars per year in the, starting from now, actually some report released earlier today, I think, or maybe yesterday, showed that since he's renamed it, the Kennedy Center has actually lost millions because of the renaming in sort of canceled tickets and canceled shows. So yeah, that's what's going on with the Kennedy Center. What do people think about that?
Nobody wants to go anyplace that Donald Trump has his name on it. And I don't know if he will ever get that through his thick skull. But if Trump does want to demolish the Kennedy Center, I'm all for it as long as he watches the demolishing from the inside of the building.
I'll tell you another thing. I lived just outside of Washington, D.C. for a little while, and I'll tell you, nobody there wants an open-air venue when it comes to anything close to the fall or winter. Folks in the area are not up to dealing with snow or how to navigate to get someplace in the snow. Quarter inch and the whole town shuts down. So something that would be open air, probably not your best bet if you're trying to stay open more than the summer. And
well, DC already has multiple open-air amphitheaters. You have the Nissan Pavilion out in Manassas. You have Wolf Trap up in Vienna. You have Merriweather Post Pavilion up in Columbia. And in DC itself, you have the Sylvan Theater right there at the Washington Memorial.
Excellent
also,
point.
If I recall correctly, the Kennedy Center's on the river, which is going to make cold weather even worse.
Yes.
That being said, I guess if people want to go inside, that's what the ballroom is for.
Well, any sentence that's followed by he said or the White House said, is completely dishonest and has no relevance whatsoever to reality. So this stuff about the Kennedy Center being somehow dilapidated and all this nonsense, none of that is. Um, I'm sure none of that's actually the case, other than they're trying to say something to try to be scary. They do like being scary, and it's just to a means to get to the end of getting what they want or what they hope they can get.
Yeah, there's also a lot of buildings like this are nonprofits, so they're not losing money, they're costing money. um it costs money to put on these things, and they are done because they are good for culture, community, the society, whatever. They're not really losing money, they just cost money, like any service costs money.
Yes, but you also have to remember the Kennedy Center is a monument to John F. Kennedy. No different than the Lincoln Memorial is a monument to Abraham Lincoln, or the Washington Monument is a monument to George Washington, or the Jefferson Memorial is a monument to Thomas Jefferson, or the FDR Memorial is a monument to FDR. That would be like Trump going and slapping his name on all of those monuments and saying the Abraham Lincoln and Donald J. Trump Memorial.
Don't give them any ideas.
Also worth noting, Kennedy got that because he was assassinated. He didn't just decide he was going to build a art center for himself.
Well, I mean, that if that bullet had only gone an inch in the other direction in Butler, Pennsylvania, maybe somebody could have his own monument.
That can be Pennsylvania's problem.
All right, and with that, we're going to move on. Our next issue is one of the Democratic establishment versus progressives. It's been a very exciting primary cycle because of all the activities going on. There's at least 12, and this is of both parties. There are at least 12 members of Congress who have lost incumbency in the primary and not in the general. Not to mention that number of incumbents not coming back is not that common. Certainly not in the primary process. So there's a very exciting thing going on, and we're still watching it. As a matter of fact, it played out again in Oklahoma Tuesday, and I'm sure will be very interesting to watch Massachusetts primary next weekend or next week. But there's a little thing going on the local level too. I thought I'd mention here in Brooklyn, New York. This is what's called Kings County. So you've heard of Queens. Well, this is Kings, but it's known by its local name. It's known as Brooklyn, more common. But there is on the Democratic Party side a structure that has a national party, a state party, and a local party. And the local party takes the form of your county, so a county committee. For a number of years now, since the Obama campaign, the progressives in the area who helped out and were the foot soldiers for Obama, then after the election, went to the local county committee and said, hey, we want to get involved. We want to stay involved. And we want to do stuff. And the party said, well, not so much. No thanks. We don't want upstarts coming and taking over the party, and you're just trying to get power, and we're not gonna accept that. And so they didn't. And the groups that wanted to do that, however, of course, being political activists, immediately formed political groups to join and to clubs to participate in. And since then, the groups have been trying to figure a way on how they can be involved. With even with the rejection, they're still trying to say, how can we be a part of this? And there's the structure of the county party. There's a chair who leads it. There's a level called the district leaders, 2 in each assembly district, who make up the executive committee. And then there's, if you want to be a part of the county committee, the way you can do it is by being there's between 2 and 4 people in each of the neighborhoods, in each what is called an election district. here, or what some places call a precinct. So that's how you can be a part of it, is join the county committee as a in an election district. So the progressives have been working towards getting seats on the county committee, and they've done a pretty good job. This election, after all these years, they finally got enough seats on the district leader level to really affect some change. The first vote after the annual meeting is to name the chair, and there's enough progressive votes on the district leaders level, from this last election at least, that say there's enough to change the person who's the chair. And that's the person from whom a lot of these concerns and corruptions have grown. Not that she isn't a part of a grand tradition. There's been a couple of folks who have been the chair who have not been terribly honest. The immediate past chair was a fellow named Frank Sedio, who you might, if you pay attention to New York politics, you'll recognize that name. He was a judge. He was dishonored and removed from the judgeship. He then wound up in the Democratic Party as the chair of the Democratic Party. They looked at the finances of the party, found out the money was not going where it was supposed to. He left being the chair of the party, and now he's wound up somehow being on the board of elections. We'll see what happens with that. So the chair who replaced him has kept some of these shenanigans going. The progressives have made that a issue, and they got enough seats. However, she has decided to counter what had happened in the election, and announced just a few days ago that she would be changing the rules of the party to expand the number of executive committee members, so that there are almost double the number. And of course, all those people would be named by her, which might just give her a hand up in the vote for chair if there's a bunch of people who owe her their position. When this was announced publicly, nobody liked it. I mean, I'm sure she did, and there's one or two other people, Anthony Beckford and some other folks, who thought it was great. But even establishment Democrats, elected established Democrats, publicly came out and said this is not a good idea. Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, he didn't just write a letter, he stood up and said he thought this was not a good idea. And Letitia James, who's the Attorney General in the state of New York. So a lot of people publicly said, not a good idea. And she said, I'm doing it. And they had a meeting that was protested against by the progressives. They did have the meeting. She got what she wanted. And she's going to move on with this idea. Now the progressives have gotten together and hired an attorney, or they had an attorney, but he filed initially before the meeting, and a judge said, you can't complain until after the vote. So the vote's been taken now, and of course the progressives are filing. We will see what happens next, but it is an exciting time, and we'll see if the change that the voters chose by electing the district leaders this past June will be kept in place, or if this rules change is allowed to change the party and the party system. Anything you'd want to say about that?
So in Texas, I'm actually an elected precinct chair, which would be the equivalent of a district leader in New York. And I have been, this is the sixth time I have run for this seat 6 times, and I have had a contested primary twice, and I have defeated my opponent by 80-20 margins both times. But our county chair is chosen by a county-wide vote in the Democratic Party. So that person is always selected by the actual voters as a whole, and not by the body of the precinct chairs. So you couldn't do this shenanigans as you did in Brooklyn, because you're actually dealing with a real elected official who was on a real ballot that was counted by a real election board and prevented them from pulling this kind of shenanigans. The only time that you actually have a vote of the precinct chairs to select a county chair is when the previous county chair has resigned and they're naming a replacement.
Very nice. Actually, we should do a segment or even a separate show on the differences between county committees in different sections of the United States. I think that might be very enlightening.
Hannah, your microphone is off.
Great. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm also in Brooklyn, so this also affects me. But it's so interesting in a derogatory way that this doesn't seem too different from like the fear that people had of voting in our mayor, that they tried to go with these two awful alternatives. There was all this controversy about Mamdani and all these things. And I remember it became this election that people from around the world were talking about. And it was like the only alternatives are a guy who famously did a bunch of corruption scandals and only got out of them because Trump pardoned him, and a guy who left his last job because of sexual harassment. So it's like, their politics aside, I do not want those people in charge of anything. But for some reason, there's this deep-seated fear of the progressives. And I feel like this is not going to give any sort of confidence. Is there really? I mean, there probably are. Maybe I'm just not all that young anymore, super progressive, but I feel like the idea that the party that I'm in can just rewrite the rules because the people I voted for, they don't like, does not fill me with a bunch of confidence that they're going to do anything to combat the sort of rise of the other side also just breaking the rules. In fact, they're just going to set up precedent. So
right, and they're seems like they're even working hand in hand in some ways. One of the other criticisms that the chair has faced is that for several cycles now, she's not given money to the candidates to run in the general election against Republicans. So where's the money, and where's it going, and what's it being used for? Well, a part of it she's been using in the primaries to target progressive challengers. So she spent more money trying to defeat progressives within the party than she spent against the Republicans. And it's shown because now in southern Brooklyn, we have several seats that have gone red, and that we have elected officials, 3 or 4 Republican elected officials, simply because there was no fight. There's nothing put to it.
I can actually relate to that. So 4 years ago, I ran for county commissioner, which is the equivalent of county supervisor in New York. And in the Democrat, I lost the Democratic primary in that race to an opponent who spent $35,000 of his own dollars in that race to defeat me. I raised more money than he did, but he spent tens of thousands, but I spent 0 of my own dollars, whereas he spent 35,000 of his own dollars to win the primary, and then he only spent $11,000 in the general election against the Republican, and it just drove me absolutely crazy that you would spend 3 times as much to win a primary and then nothing at all in the general election. Why did you even run? If that's all you were going to do, why did you even run?
Yeah. Excellent point.
Well, and the thing is that's ironic is because we have ranked choice voting now in New York City, the will of the people in theory is even more likely to come out to what they want. So basically you're pushing against all the ranked progressives as well. So it's just going to cost more wasted money to stymie these people.
Excellent point. Well, we are going to have to come back to this topic because it is very interesting and got a lot to it. But for now, I think we're going to move on to our next segment and have John talk about this, which is the issue of what SCOTUS has done with the mail-in voting ruling. The Supreme Court handed Donald Trump a victory Monday by involving his attempt to change how mail ballots are handled before November. What exactly did the courts do?
Well, first of all, the Supreme Court did not rule that Trump's mail ballot scheme is constitutional. It didn't say the president has the authority to rewrite the election procedures. It didn't even decide whether the Postal Service can legally do what Trump wants. The court basically said the states challenging Trump's executive order had sued too early. The state said, this is going to hurt us. And the Supreme Court said, well, it hasn't hurt you yet. So this is about standing and ripeness, not about whether the policy itself is legal. The court expressly left open whether the government's actual implementation would be lawful.
So basically, come back after something has already gone wrong.
Pretty much, as Lisa Needham over at Daily Kos called it, it's Schrodinger's standing. You can't stop the government from screwing up an election just because it hasn't screwed up the election yet. But once the ballots are moving and voters are getting screwed, then everybody can race back to federal court and try to unscramble the egg. Except here's the funny part. The Supreme Court said, essentially, come back when there's a final rule. Well, the USPS has finalized the rule. And today, 23 states and the District of Columbia, joined by Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, went straight back to federal court and said, fine, here's the final rule. Now can we sue? There's already a hearing scheduled for September the 3rd.
What does the final rule actually do?
Turns the Postal Service into part of a new federal election verification system. States have to give USPS lists of mail ballot recipients. Outbound and return envelopes have to carry unique barcodes. And USPS can refuse to deliver mail ballots that don't comply with the new federal standards or those that are associated with voters who aren't on the submitted list. Think about how different that is from the Postal Service's traditional role. Normally it's, here's the mail, deliver the mail. Now it becomes, before we deliver this ballot, did your state upload the right voter record? Is this the right envelope? Is this the right barcode? Does everything match our federal system? That's not just delivering election mail, that's helping to regulate the election.
But wasn't this blocked by some other judge?
Until today, Judge Indira Talwani had another nationwide injunction stopping USPS from implementing these restrictions. After Monday's Supreme Court ruling, she said she was compelled to lift it, even though she warned Trump's orders would create chaos and called it likely unconstitutional. So as of tonight, that remaining injunction is gone and USPS is legally free to start implementing the rule unless the states or voting rights groups get another court order. Which brings us back to the exciting new American election standard. What the fuck are the rules actually going to be next Thursday?
Can election officials just comply with the new regulations?
That's the part that makes me crazy. We are already running this election. In my county, the generic ballot approvals were done months ago. The county has to send to the Secretary of State the approvals for the ballots. This is how it's going to look. This is how the envelope's going to look. And the Secretary of State gives the approval back to each county elections department so that they can get things into process. Monday was the last day for a candidate to withdraw their name from the ballot. Municipalities have until Monday to formally call a November 3rd election. And in my county, we have 27 cities, 17 school districts, an untold number of municipal utility districts that most people don't even know exist. So our mail ballots have to start going out by September the 19th, and the county has to finalize all of those various, the partisan ballots and the city ballots and the school board ballots and the municipal utility district ballots all in the next 4 weeks. Now, election administrators aren't sitting around with blank sheets of paper wondering what an election envelope looks like. They already have their vendors. They already have their printing schedules, their software, their ballot programming, their legal approvals. The election is already being built. But now at the end of August, the federal government wants new envelopes, individualized barcodes, voter data uploads, and new federal compliant processes. When a federal judge herself is using the word chaos, maybe that's a clue this isn't the ideal moment to redesign how America handles election mail.
Yeah, and the administration says it's all about election security, even though this isn't going to be resolved until like a week or two before the election.
Right. Part of the broader effort is supposedly identifying non-citizens on voter rolls, but there's really a more important distinction between a database flags somebody and we found somebody illegally voting. Those are two wildly different statements. Look at Nevada. The administration initially threw around a number approaching 16,000 supposed non-citizens on the voter rolls. After more federal review, that number became 185. And even 185 doesn't mean 185 people illegally voted, or even 185 people on the voter rolls are non-citizens. Those are cases that still have to be checked by election officials. We've already seen what people actually happens when people actually investigate these federal matches. In one Missouri county, more than half the people flagged turned out to be citizen. In one Texas county, 3 people were flagged. All 3 were citizens.
Wait a minute. How does the federal government manage to flag actual citizens as non-citizens?
Really easily. My wife is a perfect example. She first got her Social Security number in the late 1990s when she was legally here on a student visa and needed it to work a part-time job. At that moment, a federal record correctly showed her as a non-citizen. She married me in 2003, and she became an American citizen in January of 2009. She registered to vote at her naturalization ceremony and cast her first vote just weeks later. Every one of those facts is true. But which record are you looking at? How old is it? Has every federal database been updated? Did the systems talk to one another correctly? An old record doesn't even have to be wrong to give you a wrong answer today. That's why a database hit is not an illegal voter. It's a lead. Somebody has to investigate it before you start screwing around with an American citizen's ballot.
And you were worried about the USPS before Trump even added all this.
Absolutely, because there's a separate problem. USPS itself acknowledges the date on a postmark may not necessarily be the date you actually mailed something. Transportation changes mean a piece of mail can enter Postal Service custody one day, but not reach the processing facility where the postmark gets applied until the next day. That matters enormously in Texas. Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd. A regular mail ballot that arrives after Election Day can still count if it arrives by 5 p.m. on the day after the election, but it needs the proper evidence showing it was mailed by 7 p.m. on Election Day. So imagine you mail your ballot on Tuesday. USPS has it on Tuesday. It reaches the postal processing facility on Wednesday. It gets a Wednesday postmark. Now your ballot is you actually mailed on time, may not have the actual evidence that a Texas law requires to count it.
So what's your advice to somebody voting by mail?
Don't play chicken with the Postal Service. USPS recommends mailing your completed ballot at least a week before the deadline. I'd go further. When the ballot arrives, vote it, sign it, send it back immediately. Don't leave it sitting on the kitchen counter. Do it now. Do it immediately. Don't wait. And if you're cutting it close, vote in person or take it inside the Postal Service and ask them to manually postmark it at the counter. Because apparently in 2026, protecting your right to vote means making eye contact with a federal employee while they stamp your envelope. Maybe take a selfie. Bring today's newspaper. Get 2 witnesses.
Proof of life.
Yeah, basically. Voting shouldn't require a law degree and a logistics degree. Election procedures shouldn't be written while ballots are being prepared. The Postal Service shouldn't suddenly become an election verification agency. And an American citizen shouldn't have to worry about whether a federal database created when they were a college when a federal database record created when they were a college student record 25 years ago is going to collide with their right to vote today. So the practical advice is incredibly simple. Vote early. Return your mail ballot early. Bank your vote. And whatever you do, don't depend on that last mail truck.
I feel like we also need to add that, there's all the work that Trump has been doing to sort of torpedo the efficiency of the USPS. And then there's all these military people or people who, are absentee for whatever reason and they, are not in their necessary state or they have some complications. It's absurd.
Well, one of the things that they're looking at, some states have no excuse mail voting. And Trump really, really hates that. He wants everybody to have an excuse, like you're not in town on that day. You're military. Trump himself, who always votes by mail, which is the height of hypocrisy in this entire thing. The the world's most important mail ballot user wants to make sure that nobody else can actually vote by mail. He is the only one that is allowed to vote by mail.
Right, right. He'll get it so that only he can do it, and only he and his family will be exempt. Right? Here we go again. All right. Excellent. Thank you, John. And that's also another one that we're going to have to check in on time from time to time on, see how it plays out.
Oh
Next
yeah,
up,
I was gonna say the election meddling is gonna run up all the way to and past the election, I'm sure.
oh yeah, oh bet on it.
Are they
Matter of
coming to
fact,
get you, Matt?
Right, exactly. I was going to say the election police were just summoned. Why are we even discussing it? All right. Well, next up here on PolitiPod Live, this is what we call whale oil beef hooked, and this is something that Hannah has something on.
So it's interesting. Usually this section has been about oil, but today it's about the beef parts. In response to the fact that cattle inventory is at historic lows, 75-year lows. So that's the amount of cattle that we have for slaughtering, for processing into beef. So beef prices have been surging, apart from surging for all the other reasons that groceries are surging. So the president plans to import 300 metric tons, that's a little over 660,000 pounds, of beef trimmings, which is what they use to make ground beef for your local McDonald's or Whataburger, from other countries, which will then be sold at a 25% below market value. So it's going to come in from other countries and it's going to be sold below what what local people will be allowed to sell at. Obviously, this is causing a panic in domestic farmers who have already had costs skyrocket with the tariffs affecting things like machine parts, fertilizer, diesel fuel, and all of these things now to only be priced out of the market by these competitors being imported in. This program is set to last for 90 days. I think it was just signed today, i.e. up to and just a little bit past the midterms to reduce the prices while it's important for these elections. But Trump has already talked about expanding it if it's needed to drop the prices more, or if retailers do not sell it at a 25% markdown, he's going to expand it even more, which is only going to further hamstring domestic production, both for this year and for continuing years, because the farmers need money to continue to buy heads of cattle, supplies, feed, et cetera, et cetera. Many farmers are worried that because of the increased ranch cost and the decreased ability to sell, that this will only compound the issue of domestic supply. There's also been requests, both governmental and amongst workers, to label the sources of the meat or track anything about it, including, is this actually beef? But that would technically be out of the theoretical scope of the president's power to guarantee. So there is nothing that's going to guarantee that this is beef, what its history is, what its quality is, any of that stuff. It's just going to show up on shelves or at restaurants or whatever. It's also worth noting that cattle ranchers are the heart of Trump supporters. It's not like messing with, sanctuary cities or whatever. These are the people who've supported him a lot, and it's going to directly threaten them. And it's not something that Trump can just hide under rhetoric of like, the Green New Deal is going to take away your beef or whatever. It's going to hit the actual ranchers who, much like the farmers, when they weren't getting, fertilizer because of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, they can literally just look and be like, I'm not selling my product and it's more expensive.
I mean, that here in Texas, that affects a large part of our economy. I mean, Texas was built on cattle ranches. Before the discovery of oil, Texans came down here in order to raise cattle, and great swaths of the land here in Texas are dedicated to beef production. And much of the history of the American West was built on cattle drives that were coming from Texas up to the railroads. And so to have this strike directly at the heart of Trump voter territory is just ironic in the extreme.
Do you think they'll actually react? I mean, there was an interview with a cattle rancher on one media source, and they were saying they were upset by it. They were, even angry, but they were more angry that people were telling them that this was happening. So that kind of pretzel logic to try to find a way out of it, a way to justify what they've done before, it
You know,
seems to be the call of the day.
I think that, I mean, I don't live in Texas. I can't speak for the Texas cattle ranchers. Maybe I can ask the soul of my grandfather, who was a Kansas cattle rancher. But I think that kind of like when Trump put his name on the stimulus bills or stimulus checks, um, people aren't going to really think that deeply, right? If they all of a sudden they can't sell their beef because somebody has outpriced them, I don't think they're going to be like, oh, but what caused this? They're just going to be like, that's the guy in charge. So maybe not, but I feel like you don't have to think too deeply to be like, that's the guy in charge.
Accountability.
Also, like literally, what is more American than like a cowboy? And these are the cows in question.
Excellent.
Here in Dallas, Cowboys just means a 25-year drought on actually winning a Super Bowl.
Look, as a Coloradoan, I'm still holding on the time we won in '97 and '98 back to back. That was huge for us.
That's 3 years longer. That's 3 years newer than us, and you guys have actually won a playoff game in that period of time.
That's true, but I feel like first it was the Raiders and then it was the Cowboys, and so it's like, hey, like, sorry, John Elway, you made it happen, even though that was 28 years ago.
All right, that's I think the last word on that, and then we'll move on. We'll go to our next segment, which in this case is all about international news. Gonna mention from the very top of this, you may recall when Trump cut and run on the Kurds in Syria. That was big news at the time, and people tended to think it was not a very good idea. Of course, it's not. It's not ever a good idea to cut and run on your allies. However, the Kurdish community in Syria has been working with the new government, and they've been working towards integration in the military and the security and administrative roles. And just the other day, the new Syrian president has vowed to continue to promote Kurdish integration. So there's some positive news coming from the international community and from the changes that are happening in Syria. Anyone want to chip in on that, or are we going to move on?
I have not much to say on Trump cutting and running on our allies, because that's basically been the story of his entire presidency. He did that to the Kurds in his first term. He did that to the Afghans, and now he's doing it to the Kurds again.
Yeah, he does seem to do that. And just as he cut and run on them and then negotiated directly with the Taliban, that famous 4th of July meeting at Camp David, where he invited the Taliban so that he could talk to them. And he's done that a number of times. He just does it. It's just his signature move. He's a guy who likes to cut and run on his allies.
Yeah, it's the most Trumpian thing there is to screw over people who thought you were working together.
Too true. Well, and now speaking of screwing over your neighbors, Trump's done that. He's put a 50% tariff on our friends and number one trade partner, Canada. And he's done it by justifying it with a section from the Smoot-Hawley law. That was from 1934, a subsection of it that's never been used, but it helps him justify using tariffs. So now he's brought that up. And also in negotiations, initially this was a ploy that he was using for negotiations with Canada. There was an agreement. They all set something up. And then last minute he came in with a handful of new things, hadn't been mentioned before. One or two of them weren't even relevant to trade. One of them was stopping the bilingual use of languages in Quebec. I mean, it's out how it's I don't know, just crazy non-issues that had maybe they feed the red meat for the culture wars that he likes to always stoke, but no relevance to the trade agreement, no relevance to trade at all. And that sabotaged the agreement last minute. Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, said, this is too much. We're not doing it. And Carney has also stood up to say that if you want to enforce 50% tariffs on us, then for $20 billion of goods, we can do the same thing. We're going to match it dollar for dollar. There'll be 50% tariffs on your up to $20 billion of your goods. We'll see what happens from there. And it's extra important because Canada is talking to the rest of the world now, realizing that they don't have a reliable partner in the United States on trade. They are starting to establish other trade partners around the world. And one of the things that he has said repeatedly in speeches like the one he gave in the UN a few months ago, it's time to stand up and do what we should do the right thing. And this is clearly a part of that. And here's Trump doing his 5D Yahtzee or whatever he wants to call it when he thinks he's doing some smooth action trade or any policy. And all it's done is started a trade war with our closest ally and trade partner.
I think it would have been funny if Canada had come back with when Trump asked them to remove French from their labeling requirements, that Canada's requirement was that all American products be labeled in bilingual in English and Spanish, just to make their heads explode.
Oh, man. Get in touch with Carney's office. You gotta get that one into his hands.
I think I've said this before, but we all know that Trump does not understand what a trade deficit means. But also, the trade deficit with Canada could disappear tomorrow if they stop sending us gas and other petroleum products, which obviously we do not want. That would really fuck us over. But yeah, if we were just not so addicted to their petroleum, then there would be no issue. Also, I want to note, if you want to learn more about the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, please check out the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which has a whole section done by Ben Stein off the top of his head, because he used to be a economist before he was an actor.
I mean, one of the things that I learned in history class was just in 1929 we took what was a stock market crash, and by layering the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act on top of that, we took what was a brief downturn and turned it into the Great Depression. And it seems to be that that's what Trump is trying to do, is lead America into the second depression of his presidency, the first one being the COVID recession, and now he's trying to actually create a man-made depression to complement that one.
The Bigley Depression. But no, I mean, yeah, like Smoot-Hawley is like one of the most famous failures of economic policy in American history. The fact that people know its name is like a reference to how terrible it was. If you can't name a lot of other economic policies, especially ones from almost 100 years ago, that's how you know that Smoot-Hawley is pretty terrible.
Bad news. Moving on to Albania in our international news roundup.
Matt, does this have something to do with Ivanka and Jared by any chance?
By golly, it's like you pay attention to the news. Yeah, absolutely. This is that story. The background here is that Albanian citizens are literally in the streets. They've been there. This is day 87 today, where they are flooding into the streets every day, having rallies, having speeches, having they're responding in what's called the Flamingo Revolution. It's called that because there was this our friends Jared and Ivanka and a couple other millionaires got together and decided to try to have a special casino or special um, resort built in a section of Albania. That's it's an island and it has some wetlands, and they were going to destroy all that and put up this resort. And the wetlands not only have a number of rare species, but among them is flamingos. And so that's how it got the nickname of the Flamingo Revolution. It is about them, and it is about how the whole thing snowballed into protest because as people learned more about it, it was first just being upset with these millionaires trying to build this resort. Then they saw that it was that it was environmentally damaging. And then they found out that the whole dealing to get it was a process that had been corrupted. And that here we go, corrupt public officials. And that's what got the citizens into the streets and has them there. Even today, there were rallies and marches and folks in the streets giving speeches and yelling and screaming about it. Their demands now, their rally cry is Albania is not for sale. And their demands an immediate resignation of the prime minister, a cancellation of the laws that are reducing environmental protections, and a cancellation of the law reducing environmental protections, addressing how they can look at or how there can be an address to comprehensive political and anti-corruption reforms put in place. What do you think about the Albanians?
I think they should kick Jared and Ivanka out of the country. Frankly, I think that should be a policy for all 191 United Nations member states.
Well, another tie-in to New York on that is our former mayor from New York City, Eric Adams, has moved to Albania and become an Albanian citizen. So he's right in the midst of the whole thing. And hey, what do you know? Corruption.
Yeah, I was going to say, as noted earlier in this podcast, the leader of one of the worst corruption scandals in U.S. history, at least in modern times. I do want to correct that Jared and Ivanka are billionaires because of the Trump coin debacle that they were able to make billions of dollars off of, not simply millionaires. But yeah, I mean, if they could actually get the PM to resign, that would be, I feel like, a pretty incredible sign.
I believe that Jared actually became a billionaire when the Saudis gave him $2 billion. I mean, it's not every day that you can take a $2 billion bribe and then have the Biden administration just completely ignore the fact that you took a $2 billion bribe while in office.
Yep. Yeah, excellent point.
I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, it's being a member of the Trump family, I'm sure he'll wind up blowing it all somehow or another.
I mean, yeah, fortunately, there's never been a history of corruption in building of real estate in their family before. The Kushners or the Trumps, never has this been a problem before.
How much was the Qatari bribe that they paid Kushner back in 2018?
Ooh, I don't know that off the top of my head.
I just remember his dad was in prison.
Yep, his dad was put in prison up here in New York, and then, well, you know, like
Chris Christie, when Chris Christie was the district attorney for the Northern District of New Jersey.
Right.
He should never be the hero in a story, but he was in this story.
Fantastic. Moving on Tuesday, a far-right Israeli prime minister or MP named Zvi Sukkot smashed a Palestinian monument while on a visit to the occupied West Bank. He'd previously claimed that he was going to do it, but in an official statement, the Israeli military said that Sukkot had acted deceptively and manipulatively without authorization, departing entirely from the improved framework and began demolishing one of the monuments. The military also claims that after reporting this behavior to their superiors, military officers with him escorted him away from the scene, and pushing back against commentators who said that the video appeared to show the soldiers just standing back and watching, which is more commonly what they do.
Yeah, so apparently he smashed it with the sledgehammer, so he must have had a sledgehammer, and then he went to this place where it was, and after saying that he was going to do it. And, some of the reports are that some of the people that it's a memorial to have been convicted of terrorism, especially from the times of Israel. But I just feel like if the military is already telling you, no, you shouldn't do that, not exactly a progressive military. So if they're telling you that this is over the line, it's pretty over the line.
I mean, Hannah, don't you just carry a sledgehammer around with you wherever you go? In case you have a bout of monument smashing to get through with?
I'm more of a chainsaw lady.
I find that I have my formal sledgehammer and my common sledgehammer. So, it depends, how am I dressed? Where am I going?
Yeah, if you're touring another country, you want to have your nicest sledgehammer.
Right, exactly. Well, that brings us to a little bit less of something to joke about. There were at least 47 people who were killed and another 50 kidnapped in a town outside Port-au-Prince, Haiti, earlier this week. This is believed to be one of the largest mass kidnappings in Haiti in recent years, and it's happening just before the December elections, the country's first elections in a decade. This, of course, puts severe doubt on the country's police and how the police are keeping people safe. I know that there's been a lot happening there. I've heard different stories of that. It is sometimes they say street gangs, sometimes they say warlords. There's depends whose perception you're looking at it through. But they're quite easily organized forces that are challenging and able to challenge the government, and it's very chaotic and a horrible situation.
And Trump wants to send all the Haitian immigrants in the United States back into that horrible situation, cruelly and unwarrantedly.
Yeah, that would be cool. That would just be even for that guy. That would be amazingly cool to send somebody to that.
Yeah, and people who, there's all this narrative of that they're destroying communities when, literally, I feel like if, nearly 100 people were being murdered and or kidnapped in my capital, I might also be like, I'm going to leave and not be here, and so it's like, what is asylum if not this? What's it useful for?
Excellent point. It looks like, from the clock on the wall, looks like we have a little bit of time left, which means we have time to look at elections for a few minutes. And I'm going to give you a quick look at what's been going on the primary schedule. We had primaries yesterday. The big one was Oklahoma. There were all sorts of federal and state and local and ballot questions. And
Matt, I want to lead off with South Carolina, where the eminently unqualified Darlene Graham won the Republican primary runoff last night over a relatively normal Ralph Norman. If you saw her debate performance last week, when her answer to every foreign policy question was, "I support the troops," you will be believing that Dr. Annie Andrews actually has a chance in an unwinnable red state.
Listen, it's up to the voters. It's up to South Carolina voters. If that's what you want, South Carolina, and if that's what you want to show the rest of the country that you're willing to give, this is your opportunity. You're either going to put this person into office and show that you support the troops, but you can't name any other policies, or you're going to put in somebody who wants to do things and make your lives better and look at things like affordability and make certain that you can afford food and rent and that we're able to actually build communities as opposed to simply saying, I support the troops. But it's
But
your
Matt,
choice.
Matt, I support the troops.
Exactly.
She couldn't
Exactly.
even say, I support freedom when asked about Taiwan and China.
But I
Like,
support the troops, Hannah. I support the troops.
I mean, to be fair, I'm sure that the troops do not want to get wrapped up in that quagmire, but I feel like one of the most delicate, balanced things in the world, and she doesn't even have some vapid response apart from I support
I
the troops,
support
which
the troops.
literally doesn't matter in this instance.
Well,
Matt,
I'm gonna.
do you support the troops, Matt?
Oh, I support the troops. I do.
Hannah,
And
do you support the troops?
Depends on what they're doing. This is why I'm not running in South Carolina.
I mean, when you're Brooklyn County, when your Kings County party chair decides to change over your entire executive committee, but I support the troops.
Well, I'll tell. Actually, I'll give you that. I'll work on that point for a second myself. I'll tell you, she and her cousin, Jose, uh, the cousin Jose, I forget his last name, um, and she both do a thing here in Brooklyn, which is very popular. Here, the line is, "I'm a real progressive. I'm a real reformer." And to mention the three big national issues, voting rights, women's rights, and um, and this shows I'm really a progressive.
But
But
do you
then when it,
support the troops?
but exactly, there's the troops in there as well. Matter of fact, one of them is a former Marine himself, so not only supporting the troops but actively being one. Um, but those are not the issues that are addressed locally. You can say those things, and that's great, but the local issues are completely different, and they're using it to avoid addressing the real concerns on the local level, and that's, I think, pretty. Um, that's pretty gross. Is that what the kids say nowadays? Gross.
I think that I think that gross is something that goes back to our generation.
Exactly. I may be outdated on that. I don't know the right term. No cap. No, wait. No, that's another thing. Okay. Well, I'll work on that.
But do you support the troops?
But I will also, not only will I support what I support, but I will also return us to Oklahoma, where the votes came sweeping down the plains. There were primaries for both the Republican and the Democratic Party. They only had the Republican and Democratic Party qualify. And as I said, there were a number of issues or a number of seats available, federal, state, local, and some couple of ballot questions. And you'll be interested in this, I think, the ballot questions that come up. There was an interesting turn on the Democratic side where the nominee for the U.S. Senate is Nikayla Thomas. She's said to be a progressive and won in Oklahoma over a fellow named Jim Priest, but did it very convincingly. It was 19% win for Thomas, which is really a statement. That's the voters saying something. This is not. This is not a this is not a two percent difference. This is a significant difference and a landslide by any means, by any definition. So congratulations to her. And on the Republican side, I guess the big story is their governor's race. The nomination went to MAGA Mike Mazzei. And but the story is by only 0.5%. That Drummond was leading most of the night, and then this
Did he win by 1%, Matt?
Not even 1%, 0.5%. He can't even support 1%.
Is Mike Lindell going to call for a recount in his election?
Exactly. Well, those Republicans, gotta watch them. We'll see if he makes his way down from Minnesota. I mentioned the two ballot questions that were there on the ballot in Oklahoma. One was the state wanted to recalculate how it reimbursed local authorities that had set up tax exemptions to lure manufacturers. And the proponents were saying things like, well, this allows the state to keep more funds, and they don't want to change the rate on what's existing. They just want to do it for new business. And also this thing about that they say that the way it's being used currently only addresses certain districts. So by allowing them to recalculate things, they would bring it to more districts, which doesn't make sense at all. So I don't know why that was part of their argument, but it was. And the opponents were saying that they just felt like the lawmakers would use this to skirt responsibility for the program, that the state had already set the rates. The local authorities are enacting it, but they're using rules made by the state in order to do it. So what are they talking about? Needing to get involved when they already are. And they felt that school districts would wind up functionally being reduced in funds because of how the state wants to do this. The other ballot question was adding voter ID requirements to the state constitution. Now, opponents were saying that this provided for greater integrity in elections and that it will protect voter ID laws from being removed by future legislators. I don't know who these future legislators are, but they are a scary bunch of people, apparently, at least in Oklahoma, that's been electing Republicans for decades. The opponents were saying that this just expanded power over elections and would include mail-in voting. They said that elections are already secure in Oklahoma. This does nothing to increase security. It's just a power grab sort of thing. And that it could lead to this is back to the future legislators. This could lead to future legislators weaponizing voting and disenfranchising voters. Now, the end results were that the voters decided not to go with the reimbursement thing, but they did go with putting voter ID requirements into the state constitution in Oklahoma. This is where I was going to mention South Carolina. That's a place you may know of. It's down south. And they actually had two elections. One has not reported its final results. And the other, of course, incumbent and empty suit Darlene Graham was in a runoff to see if she could take the nomination for the party into November. And she did beat Ralph Norman. You mentioned, I think you used the word sort of semi-normal or normal. I don't know that I've ever heard that term used in the same sentence as Ralph Norman, but I mean, it's a matter of perspective.
You can have a difference of perspective with somebody, okay, far left, far right, but when it came down to it, Ralph Norman endorsed Trump's opponent, and now I'm forgetting her, Nikki Haley in the 2024 primary. And so Ralph Norman is not on Trump's good list because he did the naughty thing of endorsing against Trump. But in my book, even if I don't agree with Ralph Norman on any one thing, endorsing against Trump makes him just a normal politician, even if I disagree with his views.
Fair enough. Fair point. I'll give you that one. And the rumor was that both Nikki Haley and Mark Sanford, both former governors in South Carolina, were both behind Norman.
Because Norman is a reasonably normal Republican. He is somebody who's actually served in Congress. And if you ask him, how would you protect Taiwan? The answer would be something more articulate than, I support the troops.
Yep. I expect so. I do expect that is true. The other election last night in South Carolina was for the Sallytown Council Seat 3 special election. And the results, as I say, have not come in yet. But when they do, we'll let you know what's going on there. Down in Georgia, the Democrats had a special election to fill the seat, U.S. House District 13 seat. The seat holder passed away. He died, David Scott. And we want to pass on condolences to his family and friends and constituents. The temporary seat holder is going to be Everton Blair, who was running against Scott's daughter, who was not able to muster enough of a support. But Everton Blair will hold the seat, but only until November. The primary to choose who's running for the full term in District 13 was passed. So we have the set Democrat and Republican for November, but with the congressman's death, they needed to fill the seat temporarily and have done so. So he's only going to be there for a couple of months, but he'll be able to say that he's a congressman. And that's about it for elections. Any other issues or anything else you want to mention about elections? Fair enough.
No.
Matt, just remember, support the troops!
Nice. We have, with all the distractions that have been popping up, there is sometimes things get overlooked. And we most certainly do not want to overlook things like the Epstein files not having been released and the unredacted versions not having been released. We make it out to be day 4089, where the unredacted Epstein list has not been released. There you go. All right. Thank you for joining us for PolitiPod Live. We're here Wednesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. And right here for PolitiPod Live. If you want political laughs, you can check out the podcast PolitiPod, which you can find at soundcloud.com/PolitiPod. This is
Hannah.
I'm John Stafford.
This is Hannah Soldner.
And I'm Matt Nisanoff saying goodbye.